Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to do a kind of like a holiday special sort of episode where we're going to discuss what is the best bang for your buck in terms of an AR style airsoft model that's whether it's M4 or your XM or whatever this family of this type of gun. And we're going to start with what we consider, well, I'm just going to arbitrarily rank them based on price or whatever, but we're just going to call them your entry levels models here. And we're going to talk a little bit about what we think some of them are, which ones are good, which ones are bad, and is there really such a thing as a perfect model? And you can probably guess the answer is probably no, but hopefully after you watch this, you can kind of figure out, well, is it worth the cost to get some XYZ quality that you care about, or is it better to stick with a lower price and still get what you really want? So hopefully that's the goal we're going to accomplish today. I'm going to break them down into what I think is like entry level, kind of to mid-level to high-end. Of course, I don't have all of the models ever out there that have ever existed, but these are just kind of the common ones. I don't own a GHK, unfortunately. I know that's a very popular model, and so I'm sorry there. But I'll just work with what I got here, and hopefully some other reviewers can chime in if to see where they rank. So first off, of course, we'll talk about our famous WE. This is WE and the GMP. These are the two entry-level models that I think exist out there. In general, this happens to be an XM177, but anything that's made by WE, for the most part, I'm going to consider them to be an entry level. And everything on this list, I would say, is within reason in the sense that they won't break immediately, right? There's different models out there that are even cheaper than the WE. They come in around like $350-ish, that price range. And that's kind of I think is kind of like the entry level point for a lot of these GBBR models, because they're that's just what you're going to get, and they're good enough that they're going to do what they need to do, and without breaking the bank, essentially. Yes, we have to accept that as a GBR rifle, it's going to be much more expensive than a pistol, but that's probably the best value that you can get. There are going to be some that are cheaper, but they're not going to be as good, and they're certainly not going to have certain quality control. So the entry model here, WE, not bad. There are different versions out there. There's the M4, there's the M16 and A4 or A3, I think it was, and then of course the classic model, the WE XM177. This particular model does not include the brass deflector. If you don't really care about that so much, and you don't care about the design, or maybe you like this design, this is a good starting point. Be aware though that eventually, before I get there are going to be parts that are not completely reliable in the system. You might get what they call a lemon, where you're going to have some parts that don't work that well, and they are not exactly the most, the quality control isn't the best on this. So, but in my case, I had to replace a lot of the internal parts. The trigger box will wear out. That's a common problem where it starts skipping, and you have to replace that. The bolt lock, sometimes it's not very reliable. When I first got mine was actually not functional and very unreliable until after I had to fix the parts again, and then it worked. But now it's working pretty well, and it hasn't been much of an issue. The bolt itself kind of gets worn out pretty quickly. But good news is that the last time I checked, you can kind of get parts pretty easily, and there are a lot of aftermarket parts. I will warn you though, be careful when you're buying aftermarket parts, again, in general, because they just aren't really, of the same tolerance as the original parts. And the problem is, even with the WE, their quality controls aren't even that good, because when I buy WE parts, sometimes the WE parts kind of have problems with fitment, because one generation does not fit with a different generation, for example. So, it's a minor issue, but just be careful of that. And so, again, not bad, good entry point. You're limited by certain models, so keep that in mind when you get this. But not bad. This has gone. You've seen my videos before. I've gone through more than 10,000 rounds. I think at this point 12 or 13,000 rounds, and it's starting to Of course, this is a paint job. Doesn't come in this color, by the way, but you can easily paint it and not be too worried about it, because this is kind of a model where it's like, all right, I'm not ruining anything. They're kind of cheap, sort of speak. So overall, not bad. For something that's going to last you about 10, 12,000 rounds, if you factor in all the repairs, yeah, at the end of the day, it's probably going to count or add up to close to a mid-end model, which I would say about in the range of $600 to $700 anyway. But remember, you're not paying all $600 or $700 at once. You're paying over the span of several years. So think of it as a down payment initially, then slowly upgrade, and then, or maybe you're not planning on using it for that long. So that's something that you might be able to consider. Aftermarket parts seems to work okay, but just be careful, because again, there are fitment issues, and if you know what you're doing, no problem. I'm not really, don't know what I'm doing a lot of times, so it has to be a plug and play. And there are plenty of videos on my channel where I kind of try to like fix stuff and it doesn't really work. But overall, would I recommend it if you kind of want a basic model that works? Yes, not bad. The other one let's go move on to the GMP model here. The GMP model is a model that I don't think is great in terms of the quality. I purposely bought this model without looking at any of the reviews out there, because I wanted to be unbiased when I bought it. I really like this old school classic vintage 1970s, 1960s model era, and so I bought one. And believe it or not, this is not a very good quality model here. Unfortunately, the exterior looks amazing. All the parts exterior, the finishing looks great. Only downside though is the quality. That's a huge issue, and it's not to the same extent where it's like the WE, where it's like, okay, you might have a non-functional bolt catch. You can still live without it. It's just less realism, but it's not going to like interfere with how you operate the gun. This thing would break in the sense that like the selector switch, you only leave it on semi. If you switch to the other modes, it doesn't work. After only about 900 rounds. And then of course the charging handle would fracture. It wasn't just the first part. I bought a second one. It had the same problem. So I had to replace that one again. So GMP, and those are both original GMP parts. So I had to get a different model, and the different model worked out okay. The same thing with the trigger box. The stock trigger box just breaks on you. And finding parts I've noticed they're not as easy to find as WE, but again, we live in a time where there's a bunch of part shortages in general. So think of that. So far, I mean, it still works, but again, there seems to be quality issues with this one. So again, if you're really looking for just something that has no brass deflector and no forward assist. I know a lot of people hate forward assist and they want that vintage look, and I'm really focused on looks right now. That's what you should go for. Ironically, the one part I did happen to look online, and people were complaining left and right about, is the GMP mags tend to leak, and I was actually anticipating that to happen, and yet it's been about 2 years now and it hasn't leaked on me yet. So for some reason, the parts that I expected to malfunction didn't, and all the crucial parts that I wasn't expecting kind of flopped on me. So keep that in mind. Also keep in mind that some of the threads are a little bit different. They're not 14 millimeter counterclockwise, they're 14 millimeter clockwise. Sorry, did I say that? Basically, it's the opposite. So WEs are negative, 14 millimeters negative, or counterclockwise. The GMP are 14 millimeter clockwise, so they're different. So keep that in mind. Parts still ultimately rare to find. Quality not that great. Price range a little bit more expensive than W, but still within that mid-tier range. In the end of the day, I don't recommend them for a beginner in terms of finding quality parts, and just the general quality is just not as good in my experience. Next up, I want to talk about this is in between the mid-tier and the entry level, and that's the VFC model here. I only have one VFC model, and that's the M733. I'm sure like the whole world has this model by now, because it was like the hottest thing to hit the market. Everyone was waiting for it, and this is finally out there. So I'm very glad that VFC decided to listen to people and produce this model. Very popular, and I've always been surprised But I love VFC model. It is more expensive, and I personally, I get the feeling that it's not that much more in terms of it's pushing into like the $500 range now with the VFC. So it's about like on average about $150 more than the WE. In terms of quality, again, it's still a little bit too hard to find out or too soon to find out, but I would say that this model is pretty good so far. There are some issues. I'm sure some people have seen issues with the triggers being stuck, or certainly at the beginning or after a few thousand rounds. You have to like, there are some issues, but they can be fixed. And some people have issues with leaking magazines on these things, but again, that's another fix. It's relatively straightforward. But overall, it seems like I've had probably about close to 2,000 rounds to this thing so far. Probably less than that, to be honest with you. Probably more like in the, let's just say 1,000. But so far, it's still doing pretty well, or pretty good, and it's not... it's beat the GMP model so far, so that's good. Accessories fit on it very well so far, and it's just, I think you're really paying though for these trademarks from Colt on it. They look awesome, and they have individualized serial numbers on them. And of course, the famous transitional receiver from the movie Heat, because that's the one with the forward brass deflector. The case deflector, but it still has the A1 style upper receiver. So I think that's a very rare model to get, and it's finally now, I guess, mainstream. Of course, realistic two-position stock and everything like that. And so, I wanted to point out though, VFC has a very good reputation for strong recoil. I've had their Glock models, I think, under the name of Stark Arms. Now they're known as Elite Force or Umarex. And they always produce pistols or GBBR models that are very, very strong in recoil, gas efficient, and great in that regard. So you're not just paying for the Colt name. I mean, you are definitely paying a lot for that, but you are getting... the recoil, which is very consistent, very strong, a little bit loud, and I forgot to mention, it also fits with this real steel parts, like this Brownell scope right here, which by the way does not fit on the WE XM177 model. That's the one of all the AR series I have. That's the one model that does not fit the scope. And it's funny because I bought that scope for the WE model, and for some reason it does not fit on that model. So, that just kills me. But it's fine. It fits on everything else. Anyway, awesome model right there. Again, a little bit more pricey. And I think if you're really going for the extra recoil and that realism look, I think VFC is the one to go right now. In terms of spare parts, I've seen a little bit more spare parts on it, but I just haven't had a need to go purchase anything extra for this model. So, it might be a bit of an upgrade. So kind of, if you don't care about that, because the WE still has pretty good recoil, this model wouldn't be too bad for those out there who are interested in this model. This next group gets into kind of a murky area, but this is, I would say, if I had to put through, maybe this is more of like the middle to upper end models, because depending on how you upgrade them, or if you buy like aftermarket parts, they can be much more expensive. But let's start with the Tokyo Marui, the stock baseline model, or the MWS system, typical M4. These, I think it's been well proven in the market. The whole world has accepted this as like kind of, I think, like the standard model of this is like where all gas blowback models should be measured against this one. I might be exaggerating. I'm a huge fan of TM, but I love their parts, and their quality is like just absolutely so good and consistent. And I want to really emphasize that, because up until now, I don't think I can really say that for a lot of the other models out there. maybe VFC a little bit, but definitely the Marui, awesome. And now this runs for about like $600. I mean, I know like there are different models out there with like the rails that might push the price a little bit higher, but if you get like the cheapest model, you can get it for around $600, which is, again, I think this is really pushing towards the middle to high end now. So it's in that in between range. So maybe the VFC is kind of in the middle range in terms of pricing, but this is a huge leap in quality and consistency now. Now, I'd say it's a little bit murky because here I have, of course, one of my favorite models, of course. This is an exact Marui internals, and everything is basically Marui. I mean, obviously the stock and the handguards are not Marui; they're just standard mil spec parts. But the internals are all Marui, magazines are Marui. And of course, the receiver is your Angry Gun receiver kit. There are some videos I've made, and there's plenty of videos floating around out there. It talks about this one. Check those out. But what was I gonna say? So yeah, I love the color of the Angry Gun kit, and this. But keep in mind that if you get the Angry Gun kit, you are basically now pushing what is in the price range of a mid to upper end range model to now a very high model or high end model, because now you're spending, at the end of the day, you're pushing close to $1,200, $1,300 in terms of how much you're putting into this. So obviously, again, you're not doing it all at once because you have the option of leaving at the Marui, and then maybe several years later you make the investment to buy the new receivers. But again, it's still, you got to think in the long term too. But one thing that I would say that's advantageous about this is the Marui is so quality that I've put through probably like 6,000 rounds so far, no real issues or anything like that. And so this is one of those models where, unlike the WE, where you're going to, by the time you push 5,000 rounds, you probably have already invested close to the same amount of money that you would have needed to just fix the original parts, right? With the Marui, after 5,000, 6,000 rounds, you're still where you're at originally. Maybe some parts are a little bit more loose, sure, but for the most part, super quality, super reliable. I'm telling you, that bolt stop on the Marui, world famous, man, quality bolt stop lock all the time. And just super, super, super quality stuff. Can't say enough about that. And I think everyone, that's just not even a fact, or not even a statement I need to even say anymore, because everyone else probably says that already. Anyway, paint job is really quality. The Cerakote is just amazing. So with that $600, I think that will last you a while. So if you end up having this for like 2-3 years and then you want to make the investment, you can still do that later on. And because all the parts in there are still going to be functional and still doing great. But again, the other model I have, of course, is the other Angry Gun, the A1 style, the brass deflector that you saw earlier. Again, I harp on that because up until now, the classic A1 style receiver or the classic A1 style deflector with the A1 style upper is very rare, and certainly with the Marui parts. Now this one, this model here I have is a little bit different because it came with different parts in it. They gutted the parts and just sent it with like Angry Gun parts with Mad Dog or Guns Modified. I forgot the exact brand, but there's a smorgasbord of different parts in there. And to be perfectly honest, I prefer to have Marui parts, as many Marui parts as possible. That's why I like my A2 my M16 A2, the M723 or M727 model better. But so either way, it's still pretty good, and it's because at the end of the day, it's still Marui with upgraded parts. I just don't think that you need to spend the extra money to upgrade it. The only difference, of course, is I run the one with the upgraded parts, quote unquote upgraded parts, with green gas instead of the traditional. What I do is a mixture of duster gas and a hint of propane, just to kind of give it an extra boost, because I will admit that duster gas alone is a little weak, so I like to put a little boost in it, but I don't have the nerves to run it completely with propane, because I think that might damage the internals. But I do have the nerve to run it with this part, or this model here, but it's been upgraded. But again, if you do the upgrades, keep in mind it's going to push it towards closer to the 800, maybe 900, maybe even $1,000. Well, I know it's gonna be more than 1,000 if you buy the receiver. So it depends on which parts you want to upgrade. If it's just internal parts, you can probably keep it around 800 something dollars. If you get the exterior, like the shell or the receivers, expect closer to like $1,200, $1,300. And then with the upgrades, you're pushing to the ViperTech category now, which is like incredibly expensive and hard to find. The good news though is Marui is going to be around for a while. They have really good parts, and you can easily find aftermarket parts for it too. Again, fitment is another issue though, however, because not every company will make parts that are completely to spec with Marui. But at least there's some consistency there, and Marui parts are good. So since with that, we're going to go and move on finally to the last category. Of course, we'll call this the high-end model, and these are really the ViperTech, and that's the only model I know of. I'm sure there are other ones out there, but I think with the high-end model here, these are. This is an M733 here with the A2 style receiver, upper receiver, and this one here is incredibly expensive. In theory, if you pay something like, I can't remember how much this was, but I remember when I got this, I couldn't buy anything for like, I think it was like a year, because that was my entire budget for Airsoft, and that was it. So you gotta ask yourself, is that, because some people say, oh yeah, no problem, I can do that as long as I get my favorite model or replica, that'll be great. But think about it, there's all these new models that come out, and then you're like, wow, I just spent all my money on one product, and now I can't get anything else. I can't even buy whatever BB shirt or something like that, so think about that. But the idea, or at least in theory, is that if you buy one model that's really good like this, in theory it should never, quote unquote, never break. In theory, I say that in theory because I've seen some people have models that broke on them. But so far for me, I have not had any issues with it. All the parts and internals are really awesome. They have not been they've not had any issues. The material, it's just like overkill probably. Some would say, like, you don't need to spend, to make the receiver out of the same forge. I think the term is forged, or they mill out the receiver. So it's like they use the same process, the real steel. But obviously it's really quality. They anodize the surface. Stuff that doesn't really affect the gameplay, but it just adds to the collector value and the weight probably. But awesome. Now, that being said, I do want to say though that in terms of like the quality of it, despite being in the clearly the upper end, and I'm talking like expect 1,200, 1,300, 1,500 even in some cases, and if you can even find them, because they're just impossible to find. I've noticed that they're not consistent though with like Tokyo Marui, and what I mean by that is, for example, sometimes you'll get a model where like the front sights are grossly misaligned because they milled out the wrong part and it's not completely centered. Other times, well, that's kind of they got a little spelling mistake on like the Colt side right there. Other times I've seen different forge markings on the receiver. And other times it's just they're missing markings in certain areas. Like for example, this model has the word up that's supposed to be here, but it's missing. And I've seen other models have it. So it's a little bit different here and there. But they're very minor things, just to be clear. But in terms of operation, definitely you can use green gas and you'll be hitting it pretty hard, and it'll probably be totally fine. And that's, again, you don't need to change much parts after that. But sometimes I feel like there are feeding issues occasionally. I've never had any feeding issues with the Marui. But the ViperTech, not as, occasionally they'll have some feeding issues, and not enough to, destroy it or anything like that, but it's just for a model that's that expensive, they spend most of that money is going to paying for the logos and for like the receiver that they're forging out of steel. And then of course the accuracy, that's a whole different story, but I would say, the Marui is still better and more consistent in terms of accuracy than the ViperTech. But that could be because, the trigger pull is much heavier on the ViperTech, so you have to actually know how to shoot, how to have good technique potentially. That's a different area. I don't know how to. I don't want to touch that area right now because I'm not an expert in that area. But the second part is it is incredibly hard to find these models here, and they're just I don't think I can even find them right now. I think I've looked and they take forever to get, and they're just, so if you can get them, if you have the money, I think you could get them. The question you're probably wondering is it better to get a Marui or a ViperTech? At this point, it used to be that you can just get the Marui, or you have to get the ViperTech because they're the only company that would make quality models with the A2 style retro model upper. But hey, now with Tokyo Marui being like the top player in town, and you can buy aftermarket parts to make the receiver look like an A2, it basically, and you can easily get Marui parts and the Angry Ken kits, whereas ViperTech it's so hard to find. It might even be cheaper to do it the Marui route with the Angry Ken kits than to even find ViperTech and get their models. So that's something to keep in mind, but is it completely out of the picture yet? Is the ViperTech completely obsolete, I guess is the word? Probably not, because it's still a collector item. You still get that unique serial number and everything like that, and you get the nice hefty weight from it, and of course, but it's starting to become, its biggest selling point was it was the only player in town up until recently that had the A2 model, or the one with the A1 model with the brass deflector on it. But now it's kind of losing its ground, and so we'll see if this ViperTech is going to be able to exist much, with the new, now the options basically. You guys know what I'm saying. So the short answer is I think you're topping out with Marui already, and I don't think you need to push further unless you really want certain characteristics like weight. You want realistic internals, because again, Marui, the internals look kind of toyish, right? Whereas ViperTech, the internals look pretty darn it's like essentially like the real steel internals there. So those are kind of like the fine tip points there. So you ask yourself, is it really worth the extra $100, the challenge of even finding in the first place to buy something like that? Of course, it takes real steel. Even like the Ford or the catch, the flash hider takes real steel parts. So it's very good. Don't get me wrong. But again, I'm not sure about the consistency. Quality so far seems awesome. Parts are great, but very, very expensive and hard to find. Forget about aftermarket parts because you have to just buy from ViperTech, from what I can find. So at the end of the day, all these models to some extent, fit their roles. I would say minus the GMP, I would say if you can't go wrong with any of these. Minus the GMP, I don't really recommend GMP. But just think about not just how much it costs initially, think of how much it costs in the long run for you after years, and how long you're planning on using it. And if you plan on upgrading it and anything like that, that's something to consider. And yes, of course, the scope fits on the brand new scope fits on the ViperTech. I forgot to mention that, but I hope that helps, and it helps people kind of make a determination of how to approach it. Especially if I know the holiday season, people kind of going to try to really have been saving up. I know I was last year. I was just saving up. There's like a one model I want to get. Which one would it be? And it's just you go back and forth. So sorry this video was so long. I really want to give a little bit top-down overview of kind of my impressions of the series. For those of you who are asking about GHK again, I'm sorry I don't know anything about them. What a loser. Sorry about that. I know. But maybe one day I'll have something for GHK. But in the meantime, I hope that was helpful, and see you guys soon.